Good morning or good afternoon to everyone on the line. I guess it depends on where you are in the world, if it's morning or afternoon, but I hope you're having a great day. This is Lori Bedford from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and it's my pleasure to be here today to host Native Americans and Online Education. With us today is our presenter. Sorry, I just got a really quick... I'm just going to put you on hold for 1 minute. I've got a really quick tech thing here to take care of. Sorry about that. Back, everyone. Sorry about that again. My name is Lori Bedford, and it's my pleasure to be here to host the session Native Americans and Online Education with our guest presenter, Tammy Pertiller. Tammy, would you like to tell folks a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yes, actually, I am somebody who has a strong background in Native American cultures, and of course, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is Native Americans and online education, and I have a bio that I sent to you. I don't know if it reached you. I'm contributing faculty in social sciences with Walden's Center for General Education. I possess 3 earned master's degrees, an MA in Spanish and Cultural History from the Catholic University of America, an MA in History of Brazil and History of Medicine from the Johns Hopkins University, and an MA in Latin American and Caribbean History from Howard University. I have developed and taught online nursing school courses in Spanish for healthcare with a focus on Amerindian cultures. I'm active in Cherokee culture and language preservation and Iroquois Six Nations cultures. I'm also active in the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, and since the 1990s, I've worked on concerts for the Native American Music Award-winning women's singing group Eulali, best known for their work with Buffy St. Marie, as well as the soundtrack for Smoke Signals, the Sundance Film Festival award-winning movie by PEN Hemingway Award winner Sherman Alexie. My presentation today will focus on highlights from a published article which I conceived and researched, Native Americans and Online Education. It was published in the Sage Encyclopedia of Online Education in September 2016, and I will also share highlights about teaching strategies for engaging Native students in the online classroom. So Shiel Ostwiga, greetings and good day in the Cherokee language. I'm honored to be here today, and I would like to give special thanks to Melissa McDowell for inviting me to present during today's CFE Showcase. I would also like to thank Lori Bedford for hosting today's gathering, and I thank each and every one for taking the time to be here today for this presentation. I think we can get started with our first slide. Lori?
Yep. Thanks so much, Tammy. Appreciate that. Lots of really great expertise, and we're anxious to get started. Just a couple of things before we do. Some housekeeping tips to take care of. Some of you may not have been in an Adobe Connect meeting for a while. Others of you may be the first time. So just a few things to keep in mind. In this, the big center pod, we call them, or the big square in the center, you will see the PowerPoint presentation, and that will be the content for today's session, and you can follow along. We'll advance the slides as Tammy is speaking. Please note that everyone in today's session will receive a copy of the PowerPoint. I'll be sending a follow-up email with a copy of this along with a recording of today's session. A couple other sections you might want to use is at the top left-hand section, we have Megan from Paradigm Captioning here today. So if you need that service, that is available for you. Just below that is a chat area. And so you can type your comments, your questions, your experiences. We'd love to hear from you, so let us know your thoughts as Tammy's presenting. Another way you can present your questions is by sharing them verbally. And if you see that there's a little guy with his hand raised on the top of your screen, it's a dark gray bar. If you click the drop-down menu, you'll see raise hand and some other things you can click on. Feel free to do that. But if you raise your hand, I can unmute your speaker, and you can share your question, your thoughts verbally with us. We'd love to hear from you. We are also, like I said, recording today's session, so just keep that in mind as we're going along asking questions that will be available for your review as well as for our colleagues' review. One last thing, and I'm not hearing any background noise, so that's great. If you're on voice over IP, you've automatically been muted. If you're on the phone, if you would just quickly mute your phone just in case the doorbell rings, the dog barks. We don't have any interruptions from that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tammy so she can get started on the presentation. Tammy?
Thank you so much. We are now looking at a glossary of abbreviations and terms. Many are already familiar with these, but just some highlights from it. AHEC, of course, is the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and it's established in 1972 to address the needs of tribal colleges. It focuses on aligning accreditation and mainstreaming the standards. And the BIA, of course, is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, part of the Department of the Interior, and it focuses on American Indian reservation lands and education. And in 2006, the BIA was formed as part of the BIA. We also have the term Indian country. I'll be using that from time to time, talking about reservations and rural areas with large populations of Native Americans, including physical spaces and cultural spheres. And we have the NCAI, National Congress of American Indians, which is a policy-making organization and focuses on providing legal support to American Indians and Alaska Native tribes. Sovereignty, of course, tribal self-governance, TANF, which is related to welfare, TCUs, tribal colleges and universities, and urban Indians, Native Americans living in large cities or metropolitan areas away from rural or reservation life. Someone had asked me why I wasn't including Hawaiians under this Native American term right here. It's because for this project, I was only looking at tribal colleges and universities, and though Hawaii does have many cultural institutions and educational institutions, none of them are affiliated with the Department of the Interior in terms of the land holdings and education that's offered. Okay, we can move to the next slide, please. By the end of this presentation, participants should be able to identify two key types of online curricula, consider the impact of Native American online higher education towards social change, and discover ways to engage Native American students in the online classroom. Next, please. And what are TCUs? Many of you know what TCUs are, but for those for whom this term is new, TCUs are classified as minority-serving higher education institutions in the United States. They are controlled and operated by Native American tribes and are currently expanding to offer online education to their students. TCUs are principally located in the southern and midwestern regions of the U.S., and they are accredited under one of two accrediting bodies, Higher Learning Commission or the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. Next slide, please. Thank you. The TCUs were conceived and created in order to make manifest the idea of Indian self-determination, and this was a public law created in 1975 or made policy by President Richard Nixon, and the idea was that Native Americans would be able to take care of educational, health, and housing issues on reservations on their own and not have as much interference with the BIA. Next, please. Thank you. Development of online education actually started as early as the 1990s, and the TCUs offer distance learning courses with satellite and two-way video, video. Such courses generally connected students at TCUs with instructors at state colleges and universities. And today, 37 TCUs provide educational opportunities to 160,000 Native American students across 16 states. And currently, 25 TCU programs lead to associate's degrees, 7 lead to bachelor's degrees, and 5 lead to master's degrees. Next, please. We have a chart here of the TCUs today. 37 AHEC members. Every single one of them is a member of AHEC. When we look at the chart, we can see that the legend shows us that the majority, all in black text, are associate's degrees. Those are 2-year programs. We can see also that the ones in red are the bachelor's degrees or 4-year programs. And another group are master's degrees. We only have 5 of those that offer master's degrees amongst the TCUs. Because of their affiliation with AHEC, the way that they're set up, students can transfer from school to school, and when they finish, they also are able to continue their education at state institutions or private institutions, both online and face-to-face. Next, please. When we look at the structure of the online courses offered at TCUs, there are 2 modes of thought. And this is not just one mode of thought. It's thinking along 2 sides, traditional or inward-facing, as I call it, nurturing Native ways and sovereignty. Cultural arts, ecospheric studies, Native American literature, Native health, Native American studies, tribal history, tribal languages, tribal law, tribal management, and casino management are considered to be something that nurtures the tribe itself. And then there's mainstream learning or outward-facing learning that reflects a wider world. And so that would include everything that we would have like accounting, American government, business management, child and family psychiatry, children's health and nutrition, computer science, criminal justice, critical thinking, and the like. And it goes all the way through to psychology and small business management and social work. Next, please. Many of the TCUs have partnered with off-reservation institutions for computerized testing, library access and research, tutoring, and foundational education. Next, please. Social issues in Indian country are wide. They include alcohol issues, chemical dependency, disability, diabetes, joblessness, poverty, TANF, violence, and teen pregnancy. And to confront these challenges, TCUs are expanding their online course offerings related to health and public safety issues in particular. Native American student enrollment at TCUs is at an all-time high. Enrollment has doubled in a 30-year period, yet only 5% of Native Americans possess graduate or professional degrees. Only 9% possess bachelor's degrees. Next, please. As of 2017, TCUs have expanded their online course offerings, still following the same 2 modes of thought. They have the inward-facing, of course, nurturing Native ways and sovereignty, American Indian studies, cartography, ethnobotany, independent studies, Native American children's literature, and pre-wildlife management. And then mainstream reflects the wider vision of algebra, which is foundational, and then allied health. It goes all the way through the medical assistant, pre-medical technology, marketing, pre-veterinary, pre-ranger, psychology, U.S. Constitution, and wealth building. Next, please. So what does this mean for us? If we're currently trending with TCUs offering incentive to students who opt to study only online with tuition discounts for online-only students, and also trending, we show that TCUs are focusing on developing safe and healthy web surfing practices for their websites. So what does that mean about online etiquette and good digital citizenship and students who now have access to cloud storage and more web portal access online? It means that there are many more students who are accessing online education at TCUs. And if we think about it, the TCUs are providing education primarily at the associate's level and secondarily at the bachelor's level. So the bigger question is, what does this mean for us at Walden? And why should we be thinking about Native American students at TCUs? In terms of demographics, the overall number of Native Americans is steadily increasing. When I first began my research project in 2014, there were 562 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Today, in 2017, there are now 567 federally recognized tribes. Thus, the Native American population itself is steadily growing. The larger question, too, is what does that mean for online higher education? We may extrapolate that the number of Native American students who will potentially access online education at the bachelor's and graduate and professional levels will continue to increase. And again, what does that mean for us at Walden? Generally speaking, Native American students want to know that the studies that they are undertaking will give them knowledge and credentials to access a range of social issues in order to effect positive social change. Next slide, please.
Before you move on, Tammy,
yes.
Bill's asking a question. Do we have information on internet access and bandwidth capacities for various tribal communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, that can be answered in the article that I wrote that's published in the Sage Encyclopedia. These are just kind of highlights, but it's all there. I talk about access and what the students do. For example, if they are living in reservations and maybe home access isn't so strong, those institutions that have casinos, the students are welcome to use the business centers there, etc. That's a great question. Hello?
Yep, go ahead, Tammy. Did you
okay, continue. Okay, great. So we now have the online courses that reflect a focus on applied learning. So the areas of study already mirror a commitment to social change through education along the two modes of thought, as I mentioned. And so there are some positive outcomes which reflect positive social change in Indian country, which are as follows. Between 1979 and 2001, 39% more Native Americans became homeowners. Between 2002 to 2007, there was a 17.9% overall increase in Native American-owned businesses. And between 2002 and 2007, receipts for Native American-owned businesses totaled $34.5 billion, which is a 28.3% overall increase. Next, please. So looking ahead, with the increase in online course offerings at TCUs, it is hoped that social issues within Indian country and amongst urban Indians will soon be more comprehensively addressed. And some considerations include, as TCUs have predominantly 2-year and secondarily 4-year programs, TCU alumni who desire to continue learning online have options outside the TCU realm. And again, what does that mean for us at Walden? It means that it is possible that the number of Native American students at Walden will increase. Next slide, please. These are our references, of course, and those provide a lot of the statistics and information. And as we continue on, next, please. I think it's the next or the next one. There we are. I have 7 strategies, and there are many strategies that we can use for engaging Native American students and other marginalized students in the online classroom. And these are just a few that I know work, and many of you have worked with various communities, both international and national, and I'm sure you have ideas as well. The first one that I would always say is to include theory. Many Native American students tend to be well acquainted with traditional modes of thought through cultural teachings, yet some mainstream theories may be new to them. One action that we can use is to help students connect larger themes with what they are learning. Include theory in student discussion responses so that they will see the connection between what they are reading and why. One other point about Native thought is, in contrast to mainstream thinking, which is linear, Native peoples tend to think in a circular pattern. Problem solving follows the same pattern, and student writing styles also tend to follow the same manner of thinking. In addition, Native students tend not to be the first to make their postings within the discussion board. Out of respect, and from a learning style that focuses on observation, they may wait for the instructor to respond to other students first, then follow the pattern that the instructor sets. Next slide. So here's an example of how, when we're in the discussion board, we can include theory along with what we're teaching. Always start with the student name, as we always would, and then we use the donut method or the sandwich method, something positive about what the student has said, and then go ahead and include theory. And as the students get accustomed to using it, you'll see it actually appear in their papers when they write them later on in the term. Okay, and end it with an open question, not a yes or no question, but an open question so that they're able to respond on the discussion board. Once they respond, the other students in the class will follow suit. Thank you. The second strategy would be to focus on time management. Many Native Americans tend to think collectively. Thus, they may value issues that involve other people over issues that only involve themselves. So in the classroom, Native students may participate in discussions with a focus on other people while postponing their respective writing assignments with a focus on the personal, even if the deadlines for both are the same. So one action we can always take is to help our students stay on track. We can encourage them to review the rubrics as well as the course calendar for prioritization and pacing. We can remind them about technical support and student support options. So we have one more example. I think the next slide. And that's a sample announcement. We've all got different announcements that we use, but this is one that helps them to see the time management that we're trying to reinforce in the classroom. Another thing that happens too, whenever we have questions in the class about assignments, we always encourage students to go to contact the instructor. However, one note about the Contact the Instructor forum, like many students from marginalized communities, Native students may feel as though they're in a fishbowl. They may be afraid to post questions about assignment instructions in Contact the Instructor for fear of being judged by others, and thus they may opt to send emails to the instructor instead. One way we can handle this is by making an announcement in the classroom, providing updates on the assignment instructions so that all students can learn from the instructor. And then the instructor can send an email in response to the student to gently point the student to the announcements area in the classroom so that that student can learn alongside other classmates. One thing that happens at TCUs, both online and face-to-face, is there's a lot of tutoring that happens. In our classes here at Walden, we really aren't tutors, we are instructors, and so the goal is to get the student back into the classroom and back into the swing of things. Next, please. Another thing that is important when teaching online is to teach transferable skills. All students appreciate the value of learning a skill that can be used many times over. Native American students are no exception. So when responding to students in the discussion board, use APA style. The students will intuitively respond in kind during each class discussion using APA style as well. Active and regular practice of the skill in a relaxed environment, such as a discussion board, can help students develop confidence in using APA style throughout their student careers and beyond. I think our next slide shows one example, and there's many, many ways to do this. Always put a page number so that the students know that they can be that detailed when they respond as well in the discussion board, and end, of course, with an open-ended question. In this case, I'm saying, in your estimation, why might this be the case? We're already pointing to the course readings, and sometimes what happens with the course readings is the students need to see that the instructors are pointing to the course readings. They like to see not only theory, but they like to see us actively using our knowledge of what the what the author is talking about in the book. Next, please. Another thing that we can do to show expertise in the classroom would be to add links to academic glossaries, to make announcements describing academic jargon so that students can get accustomed to utilizing such terms. The time horizon for a Native student has two sides. On one hand, they are aware of familial histories dating back for many, many generations. On the other hand, they are very conscious of the fact that they are perhaps the first members of the family to have an opportunity to study at the level at which they are studying. Thus, there is a sense of immediacy in that they need to see that they're gaining knowledge and skills that they can apply in the immediate. One way we can do this is to include audiovisual cues. The majority of Native Americans come from cultures that emphasize listening and visual observation more so than rote memorization for learning. One action you can take is to help your students link discussion ideas to learning outcomes by encouraging them to access multimedia or worksheets embedded in the classroom. Harkening back to course resources within discussions can also support students with a wide range of learning styles. Next, please. Here's a sample discussion response. We all have the ways that we prefer to respond to our students. The goal is to get them to utilize as much of the classroom as possible. The discussion board sometimes can be dominated by students who maybe they want to say something, and it's not saying that the students don't want to learn from each other, but Native American students, if they're coming this far to learn online, they want to learn from the materials, and they also want to learn from the instructor as well. So make sure to point them to resources that maybe, even if they're in the optional readings category, or maybe they're supplemental resources, audiovisual, go ahead and point all students to those resources so that they can learn together. Let's see. Native students are also strongly connected to family and leadership histories. In many cases, they have lived and learned from elders living in the home. They are comfortable listening and observing, so beyond video shorts and audio clips, mainstays such as timelines, genograms, and diagrams work well in the online classroom. For many students, knowledge is respected. And also, Native students do tolerate ambiguity very well. They're able to look at social issues with more than one angle. Some communities prefer to only have one answer to a question. Native students tend to be very open-minded in that sense. Next, please. Provide whole example. Oh, I'm sorry. Back, please. Can we go back? Thank you. Provide whole examples. Many Native American students tend to think holistically about projects or assignments, and sometimes they struggle with conceptualizing instructions for a new type of deliverable that may never have been seen before, such as an annotated bibliography. We can help our students envision what the finished product can look like by posting a sample annotated bibliography in a common area of the classroom. That way, all students will know from the outset what they are aiming to accomplish. In addition to the annotated bibliography, another concept that might be new to students is the idea of the literature review. If the course that you are teaching requires that students compile and submit a literature review, why not post an example in your classroom for all students to access and study? And the next page that we already saw, the next slide shows an annotated bibliography that actually comes from the Walden Writing Center. And that's also kind of part of the next slide, which is expand their online campus, strategy 6. Expand the online campus. For many marginalized students, not only are readings and multimedia materials considered resources, but just importantly, people are resources too. And so our goal will be to help students move beyond reliance not only on the instructor as a sounding board for issues should they arise. Expand students' online campus by sharing links to the Writing Center and library, for example. One thing that we can do, and this is a simple student email exchange, sometimes the students will pore over rubrics and they'll look at the comments in the gradebook and they'll try to figure out ways to improve. One thing that you can do, if they send you an email and they ask you about details about paraphrasing, certainly the Walden Writing Center has options for showing the students how to do that. Another thing is, when it comes to competition in the classroom, most Native students don't see themselves as competing with other people in terms of their studies. They tend to challenge themselves to do better. If you give them a rubric in the classroom and you also give them details in the course gradebook, chances are they will try to follow those in order to get a better handle on what it is they need to do next time. If you tell them that maybe they missed a point from the writing assignment, they will go back and try the next time around to include all of those elements. And so they kind of see themselves as their own competition. They try to compete against their own best of everything. They don't see themselves in competition with other people per se. They try to give their best to show what they can do. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, number 7 is sending gentle reminders. Like many marginalized populations, Native American students are eager to make the most of their educational opportunities. However, if they should miss deadlines for submitting their work, they may hesitate to submit deliverables late for fear of offending their instructors. So the goal is to help the students by reaching out with reminders about grace periods. It's not that they don't know that the grace periods are there. They've probably read everything inside the classroom about it, but the hesitation around how they're going to be perceived, and remember I talked about students feeling as though they're in a fishbowl. A lot of times marginalized students, and Native students are no exception, feel as though if they make mistakes, it's not just their mistake, they're reflecting the entire community by themselves. Small decisions seem bigger than they really are. And so the goal is to reach out to the student so that the student doesn't have to come secondarily to ask for permission for something that's already granted. And also, remember, between the BIA and the federal government and the tribal government, families in Indian country are highly regulated. People really respect authority, but they need to know what it is that's asked of them, and they don't want to have to ask for permission for something that is granted, so reach out to them so that doesn't have to happen. Let's take a look at the next slide. When we use email with Native students or any students, we want to use it sparingly. Remember, some of these online education programs started out as email correspondence, and Walden is not that institution. So we want to remind students about grace periods. We want to maintain the policies that are posted in the classroom and keep a positive tone throughout. Provide contact information for student support, because we don't know what's going on with their lives any more than any of the other students. And Native American students may be coming from a wide range of economic situations. Though some may be solidly middle class or higher, others may themselves be the survivors of grinding poverty. Students may know personally community members who are struggling from health issues due to the effects of living in food deserts. They have all kinds of situations with lack of access to regular health care, and others may be living in situations of housing instability. We don't know that. So we are going to point them in the direction of student support as needed and end on a high note. Say, I look forward to seeing your work. That is one way for students who are marginalized to feel as though you have high expectations for them. They already know that people have stereotypes, and there are also ideas of stigma which can follow Native students, and not just Native students, but impoverished students who are starting over, and they may be the first to attend college. A lot is on their shoulders. So always give a positive note to them to let them know that you expect the best from them. Okay, that ends this section of the presentation, and I know that there's lots of people who are making comments, which are wonderful. I see someone, Marcia, you mentioned something about storytelling. That is extremely important. You are correct. And storytelling is something that everybody learns from elders in the family. Everybody knows someone who's one of the better storytellers. A lot of the stories are not written down, but it also follows the concept of the thinking. The thinking is circular, and so when a person makes a decision or tries to solve a problem, the person may look at it from more than one perspective. Instead of looking linearly at it, the person kind of gyroscopes around it, and so it can take time for the students to respond, not just to discussion board questions, but if they're working with others on projects, and group projects are welcome, certainly in all communities, but Natives really respond very well to group projects. Standing alone on Mount Olympus is not something that most Native people do, and even myself trying to introduce myself to everyone today is not normal for me. I did it because I know who I am and I know what I bring to the table, but that's not something that I would normally do because I'm really kind of shy about it. And that's also something that when we're working with Native students and people who are from different backgrounds, we have to think, okay, they're in an environment in which they're expected to do something, but does it align with what they really think about themselves? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Let's see, Abdul, you say here, you're sharing the TCU is offering wealth management and casino management. Has the revenue from Indian casinos improved the lifestyle? Actually, it depends. It depends. When we look at the different communities on the East Coast in particular, from Connecticut all the way through down to Seminole country down in Florida, yes, it has. It depends on how the agreement is set with the Department of the Interior. In the East Coast in particular, Eastern tribes tend to have more control over the revenue that is generated, and they also tend to hire a lot of people from their own communities. Out west, it's a little different. The reservation lands out there tend to have agreements in which the revenue comes in and it goes straight to the Department of the Interior, And then the Department of the Interior creates a grants program, and then people can apply for the grants program. Now, it's not just open to the tribes. It's open to anyone in that state. So a person has to have a nonprofit, first of all, and second of all, has to be able to apply for and receive a grant. And there's a cutoff date each year to apply for and receive the monies. So it just depends regionally on what the agreements are.
And that's true. Tammy, this is Kim. Can I bring up a couple
Kim, hi!
For some of you that don't know, I applaud your effort. This is great to get people into the mindset of American Indian education to begin with. I'm a former tribal college vice president and president. I served on the AHEC board. I have a special grant right now for National Science Foundation where we are producing some masters, but mostly PhDs in the STEM area, science, technology, engineering, math, to get those cultural value systems in their chosen field of the STEM areas. The biggest problem, though, still, and everything that Tammy's talked about is very true, but one of the big 800-pound gorillas in the room really deals with, for a lot of these students, they use their Pell Grants and get to go to the tribal college and Oglala Lakota College on Pine Ridge, where I'm from, Pine Ridge Reservation. They could do that and they'd go up through a master's degree. But state universities, the private universities, whatever, some of them have so-called scholarships for students, but the problem is you don't have the family money. So when I established a scholarship at Harvard, for example, and they said, well, we already have one. I said, no, you don't. And let me tell you why. Because that is a seat in the chair or in the classroom and whatever. But the family can't afford the $7,000 you want for the dorm. They don't have the food money to buy a student union card to eat in the student union, et cetera, et cetera. And hence why you don't find Indians in the state universities, the Ivy League schools, et cetera. You do find some, and through special programs like we run with grants out of different departments in Washington, D.C., we're making some progress. But a big part of it still deals with those socioeconomic elements, especially on reservations that, as Tammy said, that are remote compared to some of them that are more urban, like in Indian country of Oklahoma, for example. You see some big differences there. So, yeah, there's a lot to think about, and I'm glad you brought all this to the forefront, Tammy. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Well, thank you. Well, one thing that's important, too, we're talking about East versus West. The Eastern tribes tend to be, by and large, living on the lands or nearby the lands from which they originally were there. So the Six Nations tribes, the Cherokee, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, after relocations, walked back and bought the land, and now they live on their original land that they've always lived on. It's different when people live in their own communities and they're operating casinos and they have tourism and they have all of these things. Once we go out west and people have been relocated onto lands that are not arable, not necessarily workable, and the ones that are workable may or may not be able to keep the revenues from the crops that they produce, it's a little different. So I think regionally, Eastern and Western concepts of Native cultures really do differ, and the types of support for growth really differs as well. And so, yeah, I think these are great questions. Thanks. Let's see. General perception. Oh, that culture is not respected? Okay, that's Boyd Dressler's comment. I can see your comment. And you're saying that there are communities that don't respect Native thought. Well, there is a belief that Native thought doesn't really exist. And so even though self-concept is what it is, we are all having to live in a modern world. We're all having to live in a Western world that's largely influenced, if we look at the history of business, by these days Japan, Germany, and of course Great Britain, and of course the U.S. And those are definitely linear thinking societies that focus on revenue now, focusing on conglomerations, focusing on globalization, all of these things that were not really there from the beginning. And so Native ways of knowing are very different. The TCUs are set up so that people can still maintain their identities And a lot of Native people are viewed as being very shy. It's not that people are shy, it's that it's inappropriate to speak when it's not your turn, and it's also sometimes inward ways of knowing people are observing and listening, but it doesn't mean that they're not paying attention in the classroom, online or otherwise. And so a lot of times being highly verbal in a mainstream sense is prized, whereas sitting quietly and being introspective is not. And these are two opposite ways of being. And I think when the students think about taking classes, Walden University actually offers many of the classes. If we look at those two modes of thought, the majority of the classes that are offered at TCUs in the mainstream list are here at Walden. So we may very well see an uptick in students who want to have that credential of saying that they've attended a private institution that's online and they're having the chance to use their skills for social change. Now, the other thing is we also see at the same time in Indian country out west, lots of the physical plant for these TCUs has not been upkept. A lot of times you'll see even on the reservations families living together in which maybe one family doesn't have heat in the house, and so the woman moves into the house with her sister, and now all the cousins live together. You have many people living like that. And you also have reservations in which the schools may not be upkept, and that may be one of the reasons for the uptick in online learning, that they can't maintain the number of students that would be applying. There's no way to expand the classrooms because there's always a shortfall, and there's no guarantee that the classrooms would all have the same technological capabilities. Maybe that's what it is. But definitely those who do have technology are using them in certain spheres, and they're usually connected to business. And so that's part of the reason why I think, and with students also using the intelligent phones that they have, and you can see those in Indian country, more and more people have intelligent phones and they're using them to access their classes. So people are finding ways around the physical limitations of where they live. Hello?
Tammy, based on what you're talking about, to answer other questions, one of the big purposes of the TCUs is cultural preservation. There's 7 criteria to becoming a federally recognized Indian nation, so you're sovereign. And the president has to sign an agreement, you know, each new president does this, that a federally recognized Indian tribe will act as a state not to exceed the powers of any other state in the United States and take care of their people, health, education, and welfare. So they are a sovereign Indian nation and state. So I had to fight the state of Oklahoma when I built their first tribal college because they thought they had to charter the school, and of course they don't. The tribal council does that. The tribal government does that. So, you know, they were going to arrest me trying to start a tribal college in Oklahoma because they don't know the federal law. But It's very important for these tribes, for the tribal colleges to maintain those tribal cultural value systems, and language and culture, the first 2 criteria that the federal government comes after a tribe and says, you're going to lose your federal recognition, which includes, you know, Indian healthcare, IHS, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some real, you know, different type of entanglements here that deal with their education, their tribal colleges, what they're trying to do, that are vital to even their existence. You have to consider some of these Indian reservations out west never had electricity. Think about this, until 1960. They didn't even have electricity throughout a reservation until 1970. By that time, how many of you, I'm nearly 70 years old, but I can remember first time seeing color TV, all the electrical appliances and whatever. Think about growing up without electricity in the 20th century, for example, and where that puts you. You know, the Common Core, for example, for some of these kids in the lower elementary schools, they don't know what an escalator is. You give them a vocabulary list, they've never seen an escalator. They've never been on an escalator. They've never flown on a commercial jet. There's lots of experiences that you can compare them to mainstream America, and you'll find they're lacking there. They don't know what they don't know sometimes. And this is the reason with the technologies, we're really starting to reach out, as Tammy's talking about, to these other people and other students so they begin to expand their world, a world that they don't know, that you take for granted.
I think you're right, and I also think a lot of people, and we don't know who's participating in our program today, but many of us have traveled to Indian country to visit relatives, and it feels like we're going back in time. Maybe they don't have running water in certain places, and maybe they don't have indoor plumbing, and I'm not in my 70s, and I know what that's about. So in a lot of cases, people are living in two worlds, not just Indian and not just mainstream, but they're living in two different technological realms, right? And so online education is at least one way for some students who do have access, and we're talking broadly, not just TCU attending students, but also urban Indians, of course, who've been in major cities like New York and Washington, D.C. and Detroit and all these places in Minneapolis for generations, certainly have some access to online education if they have access to internet, if they can afford it. And so this is the case in which online education is starting to really take off, and I'm not sure if it means that people, because they know maybe they may not be staying on the reservations, they're going to be moving for sure. If you're online, you can live anywhere, and maybe that's what it's about. I'm not sure about those details. Hello?
Thanks, Tammy. Other questions? Well, this has been a really, really robust discussion. I've really enjoyed listening to all of you and all of your insights. Bill, you raised your hand. Do you want to go ahead? Here, let me give you speaker right. There you go, Bill. You should be able to talk now. Oh, okay. No, we didn't. I don't know that we saw your question. What was it, Bill? Oh, do you think, I see it now, sorry. Do you think there are any particular certificates, degrees that we at Walden here might explore building that specifically address Native leadership or other topics? Oh, good question, Bill. Tammy, what do you think about that?
Wow, I hadn't really thought about that. I'm not sure if we even have anything of the sort, but certainly it's something that we can consider maybe trying to organize around. There's just so much that needs to be done. And I understand the issue of K through 12 education, and certainly there are still many families that still send their children to boarding schools, which we haven't talked about because our focus here really is higher education. But education for Native peoples really kind of runs a wide range of options. Some people send their children to the tribal schools. Some people prefer the state schools. Some prefer the community colleges, whether TCU or not, and some people, because they send their children away to boarding school at the high school level, they expect their children to go away to college. So it just depends. But for online education, that's something that's still growing, and I don't know about Walden having a certificate or a degree or anything of the sort, but it is certainly something to think about. Thank you so much, Bill, for bringing that up. I really appreciate hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, great ideas, and I think that's a great conversation for us to continue and for us to continue to think about. So again, I really enjoyed listening to just the wealth of expertise in the room and the various ideas around the issues of Native Americans and online education. And again, I think this is something that we can continue to have discussions around. Tammy, thank you so much for sharing your research and your experience and your ideas that I think many of our faculty can take back to the classroom. So with that, I'd like to wish everyone a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for taking part of that day out to share with us and have these great discussions.
Okay, Wendell, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.